Hello, my name is Garvin, and I read things and jabber on about them on the internet for your entertainment. Today, we're going to briefly discuss psychic powers, both in the general sense and how they're used in science fiction, and specifically how psychic powers were used in Philip K. Dick's stories. So let's not waste any more time, let's turn to. Now let me be upfront, despite my best efforts, I haven't read all of Philip K. Dick's work, nor have I even tracked all of it down, because there's a lot of work that he's done out there. So if I missed a story that you feel is important or would fit really well into this conversation, let me apologize for that and say I would appreciate it if you left a comment telling me about that story and why you think it fits. Thank you in advance. Now, to get back to our wider topic, this isn't going to be an exhaustive look, not by my standards, but let me try to give you a decent overview. And to do that, we got to talk about how psychic powers even became a thing. And to do that, we got to go all the way back to the beginning of the 1800s. At that period, there were various spiritual and occultic movements that were gaining speed. And one of the practices was the use of a person called a medium who was supposed to have the ability to contact spirits to gain information. Sometimes these would be the spirits of the dead or spiritual beings who existed beyond the mortal plane. Leaders of these movements, who often were mediums or claimed to be mediums, would also claim to have other mental and spiritual powers. Examples of these powers are astral projection, telepathy, the ability to move things by thought alone, and a good example of one of these leaders is Helena Blavatsky, who keeps showing up in my videos. First she's in Atlantis, then she's in Lemuria, and now she's here. And I have a feeling this isn't going to stop until I finally sit down and just do a video about her, but we're not doing that today. Getting back to psychic powers, this is how psychic and mental abilities became part of the popular culture, and this is also where the idea that people who have psychic powers are somehow more advanced than the average guy on the street. And I want you to keep a hold of that idea because we're circling back to that later. Getting back to the psychic powers in the 1800s, the leaders of these movements were making a lot of very bold claims, and that caused a demand to study these people and their claimed powers to either prove or disprove the existence of these abilities. And that leads us to the term parapsychology, which was coined in 1899 by Max Desor, a German philosopher. And this term would be adopted by the American botanist J.P. Rhine, and we will get to him in a minute. So by the mid-1800s, to step back a moment, there were attempts to find conclusive proof of these psychic abilities through at least semi-scientific experiments, but nothing conclusive was ever found. Most of these experiments were carried out in the United Kingdom. In the United States, and please keep in mind, I'm skipping a lot here, the first systematic research was carried out in Stanford in 1911. 10,000 experiments were conducted and researched and found no evidence of extrasensory communication or powers that couldn't be explained by pure chance. What that means is the rate of success was so low that it could be explained by lucky guesses. In 1930, J.B. Rhine at Duke University started his own studies using volunteers from the student body. This is where a lot of the tests you see used in movies and television shows come from. For example, the test you see in Ghostbusters. My favorite is the one where a researcher is holding a card with a symbol on it, and the other person has to tell everyone what symbol is on that card without seeing it. While Rhine would claim that his 90,000 tests showed evidence of psychic ability, attempts to replicate the results always failed. And in science, if other people can't replicate your results with your method, it's considered no good. However, J.B. Rhine would write books and publicly champion his results. So he brought psychic powers out of the realm of mysticism and into the lab, giving the whole thing a semi-scientific gloss, at least to the public view. Because of J.B. Rhine and his work in public relations, these ideas seeped into the popular consciousness, and they became linked with human evolution. The idea here was that humanity's next step on the evolutionary ladder would be to develop mental abilities and powers, and through that become a more advanced life form. Now, evolution doesn't really work that way, but let's cut the people of the past some slack. They didn't have access to the total sum of human knowledge in their pocket, did they? We do, and that hasn't stopped us modern people from believing in some really dumb stuff, has it? Getting back to the topic, though, either way, psychic powers, or ESP, or psionics, whatever you want to call them, became this semi-scientific idea, while at the same time holding on to its link of a person with psychic powers being more enlightened or more advanced than the common man, being a higher step up the ladder of existence, so to speak. A lot of early science fiction and pulp writers and editors embraced this idea. You can see this in early science fiction like The Lensman or the Barsoom stories. Among science fiction writers who really locked into this idea was the incredibly influential editor John W. Campbell, who was deeply influenced by J.B. Rhine's work. He insisted that such beings as psychics would be good and would naturally be in charge, so he wanted them always written that way. He wasn't the only one. I mentioned earlier the Lensman series by E. Doc Smith, a book series I happen to enjoy, although I'm going to let you guys know they're a product of their time. In that series, men are given psychic powers through the use of a special technological lens and through intense training, and only heroic, deeply moral men are chosen for that. There's also Slan by A.E. von Vogie, where a race of supermen with mental powers are being hunted by a tyrannical human government. And that had a deep impact on the science fiction fandom, with a lot of early science fiction fans adopting the slogan, fans or slans. But getting back to it, there's also a lot that John Campbell did for the science fiction genre, but that deserves its own video, so I'm just going to leave that there. What's important is this is the environment in the 1950s where Philip K. Dick started publishing, and according to the gossip, Mr. Dick did not get along with Mr. Campbell. Now, I do want to note that most of Philip K. Dick's stories don't involve psychic powers per se, but there are stories where they play a part. Let me give you a few examples. There's the Solar Lottery, where the leader of humanity is chosen by lottery, and is protected by telepathic bodyguards, who are protecting him from an assassin who is also chosen by lottery. Which, wow, that's a stressful system to live in, I think. In the book Ubik, psychics are used by corporations as spies, saboteurs, and worse. And there's also Minority Report, which rests on the relentless exploitation of free psychics able to see into the future, and of course, The Golden Man that I covered earlier this month. These stories go against the grain of the earlier stories I mentioned, because the psychics here are often just tools of an oppressive or dangerous system, or they're just flat-out predators of humanity. Either way, these psychics are not good, and they are definitely not in charge. As Mr. Dick got older, though, an experience he had changed how he used psychic powers. The story, as I understand it, goes like this. In February of 1974, while recovering from dental surgery, a delivery woman wearing a gold Christian fish necklace knocked on his door. As he opened it, a pink light reflected off the necklace and hit him, and as a result, he had visions, where scenes of ancient Rome were transposed over his neighborhood. He would claim one vision would tell him that his infant son was sick, and when he rushed the baby to the hospital, doctors would confirm that the illness was there, and they were able to treat and save his son. There's more to this experience, but that's what we need to know for the sake of the video. Mr. Dick would believe that these visions were telepathic in nature, that a greater consciousness was trying to communicate to him, and this would show up in some of his later written works. For example, Radio Free Abernethy, that I covered a few years back, but also the novel Valis, The Divine Invasion, the Transmigration of Timothy Archer. These stories brought mysticism and psychic powers back together, as psychic powers were now the instrument of religious experience and communication with higher beings. This would often bring the characters who had these experiences into conflict with corrupt earthly authorities who regarded this spiritual awareness as a threat, which these days is kind of easy to believe. How Philip K. Dick related to psychic powers in general, though, is reflective of how he related to power and authority, which was a combination of cynicism and distrust for the most part. However, he still held out hope that somewhere out there was a benevolent power that only wished us well. And like the spiritual and occultic movements of the 1800s, He regarded psychic powers, these telepathic visions, as a potential way to make contact and communicate with that possible power. In modern science fiction, the use of psychic powers is fairly rare and growing rarer. And a lot of this is because, despite repeated attempts, there simply is no convincing scientific evidence for the existence of these powers. And science fiction often rests on the idea of the possible if implausible. The idea that everything that you're seeing in this story is at least possible if unlikely. Now that said, there is still a lot of belief in the possibility of psychic powers out there. A Gallup poll in 2005 found that 41% of Americans believed in some kind of extrasensory perception, 26% believed in clairvoyance, the ability to see the future, and 31% believed in some form of telepathy or psychic communication. So if you want to use psychic powers in your science fiction, there are plenty of people who aren't going to roll their eyes at you, and you might as well write what you want to read, folks. And for all my hard science fiction fans, I understand, but let people enjoy the soft stuff. It's okay. And it's on that note that I'm going to end this week's video. I hope you found it informative or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing, as all of that helps me in my eternal battle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you really enjoyed the video, consider joining my Everwise patrons, where $1 a month gets you a vote on what upcoming videos get made. Speaking of Everwise patrons, special thanks to Big Steve. I hope the next month is better for you, man. Next week, my patrons have decided I need to head back to the Babylon 5 universe with the History of the Shadows. And I hope you join me for that, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.